When you look at a woman who carries herself with certainty, direction, quiet confidence, and a ounce of intentionality you can feel from across the room, it's easy to assume she was just born like that, but she wasn't. Those traits aren't accidents, they're skills she decided to master early before the world shaped her into something smaller than she was meant to be. Today we're breaking down the 10 skills every high-value woman learns long before life forces her to. These aren't tricks, they're habits that build a mindset, a presence, and a standard that sets her apart in a world that constantly pressures her to shrink, chase, or second-guess herself. If you want to show up as the kind of woman who doesn't need to announce her worth, because it's already obvious, these are the skills that shape that identity from the inside out, and the earlier you master them, the stronger they become. A high-value woman masters emotional regulation early because she learns, sometimes the hard way, that the world will always give her reasons to react, but she doesn't want to live her life being pulled like a puppet on strings that other people hold. She starts to understand that emotional regulation isn't about suppressing how she feels, it's about choosing how she responds. It's about taking the time to pause, breathe, and access clarity before she lets temporary emotions make permanent decisions. She realizes early that anyone can feel something, anyone can react impulsively, but very few can feel deeply without letting those feelings control their behavior. She becomes one of those few. She learns that you don't rise in life because everything around you is peaceful. You rise because you create peace inside yourself, even in chaotic environments, and that awareness becomes her anchor. She starts becoming intentional with her emotional world in small daily moments that most people overlook. When someone talks over her, instead of snapping back or shrinking, she notices the irritation but chooses her words with precision. When plans fall apart, she allows herself to feel the disappointment but doesn't spiral into helplessness. When someone tries to provoke her, she recognizes the trap, steps back, and chooses composure because she knows that self-control is self-respect in action. She becomes aware that emotional regulation is what gives her the power to stay grounded when others lose balance. And this becomes one of her biggest strengths because it separates her from people who act first and think later. She understands that emotions are signals, not instructions. They're meant to be felt, examined, and understood, not blindly obeyed. She learns how to sit with them rather than run from them. She allows sadness without letting it derail her. She embraces anger without letting it drive her. She observes fear without letting it freeze her. She becomes the kind of woman who can experience an emotional storm without letting anyone see her panic, because she's learned to calm the storm within rather than waiting for the world to calm around her. This skill starts showing up everywhere in her life. In conversations, she listens fully instead of preparing a defensive reaction in her head. In conflicts, she reflects before responding. In relationships, she doesn't allow panic, overthinking, or insecurity to dictate her actions. She doesn't text impulsively, doesn't beg for clarity, doesn't chase validation, and doesn't allow emotional pressure to push her into decisions she'll regret later. She begins to understand the profound impact of this emotional discipline. It protects her from manipulation because she is no longer easily triggered. It protects her from guilt traps because she responds with logic, not fear. It protects her from cycles of toxic relationships because she doesn't let loneliness or temporary affection blind her to patterns. It protects her reputation because she remains poised even when others attempt to drag her into drama. Emotional regulation becomes her quiet armor, something no one sees but everyone feels because the way she carries herself changes. She speaks slower, moves with intention, chooses silence over useless arguments, and chooses grace over reaction. People notice it in the way she walks away from situations others would explode in. They see it in the way she gives measured responses when someone tries to provoke her. They see it in the way she doesn't let the world rush her, derail her, or define her. Emotional regulation also deepens her relationships because she learns to communicate clearly rather than emotionally dumping or lashing out. She can express her needs without accusation. She can discuss problems without escalating them. She can listen without trying to control the outcome. She becomes safer to love because she creates emotional stability around her and people gravitate toward that. Her friendships become healthier because she doesn't project her insecurities. Her romantic relationships become stronger because she doesn't treat her partner like a landing spot for her unresolved emotions. Her family interactions improve because she no longer rises to every bait or repeats old emotional cycles. In her professional life, emotional regulation becomes one of her greatest assets. She doesn't crumble under pressure. She doesn't take criticism as a personal attack. She doesn't carry emotional baggage into her work. She becomes the one who remains calm in stressful situations, the one people trust with important tasks, the one who can handle conflict without letting ego take over. While others get caught up in office drama, she stays focused on her goals. While others take things personally, she sees the bigger picture. While others burn bridges from emotional reactions, she builds them intentionally. She realizes that emotional intelligence is not only maturity, it is strategy. It sets her apart in leadership, in communication, in negotiations, and in decision making because she doesn't let emotions cloud her judgment. As she grows, emotional regulation gives her something even more valuable: self-security. She stops seeking validation because she no longer needs emotional reassurance to feel grounded. She stops clinging to people because she no longer fears losing what disrupts her peace. She stops over-explaining because she no longer feels pressured to justify her feelings. She stops arguing with people committed to misunderstanding her because she values her energy more than the need to be right. She becomes more selective with the battles she fights, the words she uses, and the energy she gives. She learns that peace is expensive and emotional control is how she protects that investment. She becomes more patient with herself because she understands her own emotions instead of judging them. She becomes more compassionate toward others because she sees their reactions for what they are: unregulated emotions looking for an outlet. She doesn't take things as personally because she recognizes that most people react from pain, not truth. Emotional regulation also strengthens her sense of self. She stops needing the world to validate her choices because she no longer makes choices out of emotional desperation. She becomes intentional rather than reactive. She becomes steady rather than scattered. She becomes centered rather than easily shaken. She becomes the woman who can walk away without drama, who can decline without guilt, who can wait without anxiety, who can speak without attacking, and who can love without losing herself. Emotional regulation becomes her secret superpower because it shapes her identity from the inside out. It becomes the foundation for confidence because she knows she can trust herself under pressure. It becomes the foundation for self-respect because she refuses to lose control of herself because of someone else's behavior. It becomes the foundation for her future because she makes decisions with wisdom rather than impulse. And as she masters this early, she realizes it's not about being emotionless. It's about having emotions without being ruled by them. It's about feeling deeply while staying grounded. It's about being soft yet strong, calm yet powerful, graceful yet firm. It's about becoming a woman the world can't easily shake because she no longer gives her power away to temporary emotions, unpredictable people, or unstable circumstances. A high-value woman masters boundaries early because she understands that her life, her energy, and her peace cannot be left unguarded in a world that constantly tries to take more than it gives. She starts to see that boundaries are not walls meant to keep people out, but filters meant to keep her aligned with what strengthens her instead of what drains her. She realizes that without boundaries, even the kindest heart becomes exhausted, even the strongest mind becomes overwhelmed, and even the most confident person becomes insecure. So she decides early that she will not live her life wide open for anyone to walk through as they please. She begins noticing how often people try to stretch her limits, how they test her availability, how they push for more of her time, her attention, or her emotional labor than she genuinely wants to give. She watches how easily others can guilt her, pressure her, or manipulate her if she doesn't clearly define where she stands, and instead of letting that pattern continue, she chooses to set standards that protect her. She starts using the word no without feeling the need to cushion it with long explanations. She stops apologizing for choosing herself. She stops letting people access her just because they want to. She stops giving unlimited chances to those who show her they don't value them. She stops tolerating behavior that drains her simply to avoid being seen as difficult. She understands early on that protecting her peace is more important than keeping the peace. so she becomes intentional with her time, her presence, and her emotional availability. She doesn't overstretch herself to impress others. She doesn't let guilt dictate her decisions. She doesn't try to be everything to everyone because she knows that spreading herself thin leaves nothing meaningful for herself. Boundaries become a way of life for her, not because she's cold, but because she cares enough about herself to not let others rewrite her values. As she masters boundaries, something powerful happens. She stops being chosen out of convenience and starts being valued out of respect. People learn quickly that she is not someone they can take advantage of. They understand that her kindness is not permission to manipulate her. They realize that her time has weight, her presence has value, and her energy is not easily accessible. She doesn't beg for reciprocity, she requires it. She doesn't settle for half effort, she expects consistency. She doesn't tolerate disrespect. She removes herself from environments where it exists. And because she does this consistently, life brings her people who match the standards she sets. She begins to attract relationships that feel like growth rather than chaos, friendships rooted in mutual respect rather than convenience, romantic partners who show up with intention rather than excuses, work environments that appreciate her contribution rather than exploit her willingness. Boundaries filter out everything that is not aligned with who she is becoming, leaving room only for what truly supports her. She also learns that boundaries are not always about others. Sometimes they are about protecting herself from her own unhealthy patterns. She sets boundaries with overthinking by choosing action over spiraling. She sets boundaries with self-doubt by not letting it dictate her decisions. She sets boundaries with procrastination by enforcing discipline even when motivation is low. She sets boundaries with her future by refusing to repeat the mistakes of her past. She sets boundaries with her own heart by not giving it to people who have shown they can't hold it with care. She becomes deeply aware of the environments she chooses to stay in. If a space constantly drains her, she doesn't fight for a seat at that table. She leaves and finds her own. If a relationship constantly takes without giving back, she stops trying to fix it alone. If a person shows her their pattern, she believes it instead of holding on to their potential. She finally understands that boundaries are not punishments, they are protection, direction, and clarity. As her boundaries strengthen, so does her sense of identity. She no longer molds herself to fit the expectations of others. She no longer bends her values to avoid rejection. She no longer sacrifices her well-being for temporary approval. She stands firmly in who she is and what she needs, even when others don't understand, because she knows that people who genuinely care will never be offended by her boundaries. The more she practices this, the more she recognizes that boundaries are an expression of self-respect. They communicate what she allows, what she tolerates, and what she refuses. They shape the way people treat her because they show people what she is willing to walk away from. She stops giving silent chances to people who repeatedly cross her limits. She stops engaging in emotionally draining conversations that lead nowhere. She stops offering closeness to people who haven't earned trust. She becomes selective, not because she thinks she's better, but because she knows her energy is not replaceable. She understands that emotional access is the most valuable form of access a person can have, and she guards it with intention. Emotional boundaries become especially important to her. She no longer lets people vent endlessly into her life while giving nothing in return. She stops carrying the emotional weight of everyone around her. She recognizes that she is not responsible for fixing others, healing others, or saving others at the cost of herself. She learns to help without absorbing, to care without losing herself, and to empathize without becoming a dumping ground. She realizes that emotional boundaries allow her to stay compassionate without becoming consumed. As she gets better at enforcing boundaries, she becomes more peaceful. Drama stops finding her because she no longer engages with it. Manipulators avoid her because they can't influence her. People with unclear intentions lose interest because she requires transparency. Energetic vampires fade away because she no longer feeds them. Her life becomes quieter, calmer, more focused. She begins to evolve into the kind of woman whose presence feels grounded, whose decisions feel firm, and whose energy feels protected. People sense her standards without needing her to announce them because boundaries are felt, not spoken. She becomes the woman who doesn't explain her worth. She demonstrates it through what she allows. She doesn't negotiate her self-respect, she upholds it through what she declines. She doesn't chase people to stay, she lets them leave because she knows that anyone who walks away when she enforces a boundary was benefiting from her lack of one. And the earlier she learns this, the more her life aligns with her true self. Boundaries become the structure that supports her growth, the shield that protects her inner world, and the foundation that helps her build relationships that are fulfilling rather than draining. She becomes intentional with who gets close, who gets access, and who gets the privilege of her time. And through this intentionality, she transforms her life into a space where she feels safe, respected, valued, and in control of her own story. A high-value woman masters self-direction early because she realizes that waiting for life to hand her purpose is the fastest way to end up living a life built on other people's expectations instead of her own. She understands that direction isn't something you wake up with one morning, it's something you create through choices that are aligned with who you are and who you want to become. She starts understanding that no one is coming to save her, guide her, push her, or hand her the blueprint. She realizes she is the architect of her own future, and if she doesn't take ownership of her path, someone else will gladly map her life for her. She becomes aware of how easy it is to get lost in the noise of the world, to follow trends, to copy what everyone else is doing, to let her goals shift according to what people think she should want. So instead, she turns inward. She starts asking herself the hard questions most people avoid. What do I want this year to look like for me? What kind of woman do I want to grow into? What habits support that version of me, and what habits pull me away from her? What environments elevate me and what environments drain me? Who makes me better and who keeps me stuck? She learns to sit with those questions until the answers become clear, and when they do, she uses them to guide her decisions rather than letting external pressure dictate her direction. She starts living with intention, and that intention becomes her internal compass. She stops drifting through life and starts steering it. She stops moving on autopilot and starts making choices that reflect her values rather than her fears. She begins choosing growth over comfort because she knows comfort is where dreams go to die. She chooses discipline over motivation because she knows motivation isn't reliable. She chooses long-term fulfillment over temporary gratification because she understands that the woman she wants to become requires commitment, not convenience. She realizes early that self-direction is not about knowing every step, it's about moving forward even when the path isn't perfectly defined. She starts setting goals that challenge her, not goals that impress others. She makes plans even when she's scared. She takes action even when she's unsure. She learns to trust herself even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. This builds a quiet confidence that grows with every small promise she keeps to herself. She becomes the kind of woman who wakes up with purpose because she chooses purpose, not because it magically appears. As she grows in this skill, self-direction begins showing up in every area of her life. In her career, she doesn't wait for opportunities, she creates them. She doesn't stay stuck in environments that limit her, she learns the skills she needs to move. She doesn't rely on luck, she relies on preparation. She doesn't wait for someone to notice her potential. She builds a track record that speaks louder than any empty assurance. In her relationships, self-direction becomes even more powerful. She no longer lets romantic attention distract her from her path. She no longer abandons her goals to maintain a relationship. She no longer allows someone else's lack of ambition to slow down her progress. She becomes anchored in who she is becoming, and that anchor protects her from lowering her standards for the sake of companionship. She knows that any relationship that requires her to shrink is not a relationship meant for her future. She stops chasing the idea of being chosen and starts choosing herself every day. She stops tolerating inconsistency because it interrupts her direction. She stops accepting bare minimum effort because she knows it derails her focus. She becomes intentional with who she lets walk beside her because she knows her direction determines her destination, and not everyone is meant to go where she's headed. In her personal life, self-direction brings her clarity. She starts prioritizing habits that align with the woman she wants to be. She reads more, learns more, reflects more, grows more. She becomes selective with how she spends her time because she understands that wasted time is wasted potential. She begins investing in routines that give her stability, confidence, and self-respect. She creates structure for herself because she knows structure gives her freedom. She practices discipline not because she enjoys it every day, but because she knows it shapes her into a woman with options. And she's not interested in a life where she feels limited. She starts separating what she wants from what she has been taught to want. She learns to differentiate between genuine desire and borrowed ambition. She begins to identify which dreams belong to her and which belong to someone else's vision. This self-honesty becomes a form of liberation because it frees her from performing for the world. She stops comparing her life to others because she knows she's following her own blueprint, not theirs. She stops rushing her progress because she understands timing is different for everyone. She stops letting society pressure her into timelines that don't align with her goals. She starts making choices based on alignment, not approval. And she learns the more she directs her own life, the less she cares about how others perceive it. As she masters self-direction, she becomes more resilient. When obstacles appear, she doesn't crumble, she adapts. When plans fall apart, she doesn't collapse. She pivots. When people doubt her, she doesn't give up, she works quietly until results make the noise for her. She stops needing reassurance because she builds trust with herself through consistent action. She stops fearing uncertainty because she knows she can handle whatever comes her way. She stops waiting for perfect conditions because she knows progress comes from movement, not perfection. Self-direction also makes her more disciplined emotionally. She stops letting her mood decide what her day looks like. She stops letting fear talk her out of opportunities. She stops letting setbacks define her worth. She becomes the woman who keeps going even when she doesn't feel like it. She pushes forward because she knows that the path to her future is built with persistent effort, not occasional motivation. As she grows, she realizes that self-direction creates a sense of power that cannot be faked. It shows in her posture, in the way she walks into a room, in the way she speaks, in the choices she makes. People notice it even before she does. They see the difference in her consistency, her confidence, her discipline, her clarity. They see a woman who isn't waiting for life to happen, she is happening to life. This sense of direction becomes magnetic because people are naturally drawn to someone who knows where they are going, even if they haven't reached the destination yet. She becomes the woman with a future, the woman with a standard, the woman with a vision. And the earlier she masters this, the more unstoppable she becomes. She begins building a life that reflects her effort, not her excuses. A life that reflects her growth, not her fears. A life that reflects her identity, not her limitations. She learns that self-direction is not about having all the answers, but about refusing to live without intention. It's about taking ownership of her path, trusting her journey, and choosing her future with clarity rather than chance. It's about becoming a woman who leads herself first so she never has to depend on someone else to lead her toward the life she knows she is capable of creating.